Sorry. The audio is working. Okay, yeah. Okay, you're working, but I didn't want to hear it come through my phone. My reverberation. So generally within your environment, both as a student and then later as a professional, the chances that you discuss actually the emotional or the spiritual and the political attribute of what you're designing is very unlikely. Yet I believe that those attributes for a certain percentage of architects and artists and other people in the world is essential for feeling really good about what they're trying to do as architects. Right? Of course, you can feel, and you should feel great when you design a perfectly functional building, which satisfies the budget and the construction technologies within your region. But this is one way to think about it. And I believe that the vast majority of architectural theory is based on this idea of the kind of spirited response, not kind of standard architectural dialogue. That is in the profession in order to produce buildings for developers and private individuals and the construction industry. So I'm just going to go through what's actually going to happen. And so I have created a file of about 15 of Dan Coma's challenges to architects. And I'm just going to read what I wrote just kind of quickly. For 20 years, Romanian architect Dan Coma has issued challenges in the format of architectural competitions. Without reading his explanations, I believe Coma used the process of provocation and a spirit of hope to add vital complexity to the international dialogue about the potential power and agency of the architect in their building. He revived the 19th century concept of learning, dialoguing, and arguing with the great creatives in all artistic and philosophical disciplines. In other words, he dialogues with them. He said, just because they die, just because they don't offer everything, you can still dialogue with them, you can still communicate with them, which is very consistent within other professions. Like if you are a writer and you didn't read Victor Hugo, people would be like, what? I mean, because you would dialogue with him, or you would dialogue with Toni Morrison. You would just in your own thinking. And so he's adding that into the process. In today's world, he proposes that architects in their buildings connect with contemporary artists and thoughts and feelings. As he encourages emotional awareness, as he encourages emotional awareness, musicians have become guideposts in many cases. With their minds, architects are asked to challenge through their buildings the changes in the world that transform humans, such as war, corporate influence, news, plagiarism, and environmental loss. He asks you to abandon the exploration of formal skills and functional awareness for their own sake, in other words, just doing them within the dialogue of architecture, and dedicate those skills to the future of humans as humans who care, feel, and think. So although it seems like it's kind of a generic challenge to make better buildings or and maybe to respond sociopolitically and a kind of make the world better, he actually just wants to make humans better and make a world better in which good humans connect with each other and have a chance to be good in their own way. So it's about the human being through the activities of the architect and through the environment, but always back to the human being in terms of what the goals are. So the exercise for the course, to read the challenges. I have included a text version of the challenge. There are two versions on the site. One is text and one is with pictures. When I tried to use the one with pictures, AI didn't like all that extra material. So I made one that's just text, which then you can use to identify attributes of his thinking and feeling in a more summarized way. and that you agree with, and identify those attributes. Then I need for you to select a public space anywhere you want in the world, anything, any kind of public space. Provide an image, a name, and a location. Very simple. Then you write down the ideas and emotions you want to convey to the on-site visitors. There's the two groups, on-site visitors and social media viewers, right? So you're recognizing that there might be a difference between how an on-site visitor would be able to be engaged with whatever it is you do versus also what social media would be engaged to do. And so how does it handle both? Does one have to say, big giant sign says you feel good here, but then the real person on the site feels good there? You know, so is there a relationship there to that thing because you exist in that world? And then just make a very simple drawing of an installation or intervention to achieve your ideas of a physical experience and thoughts by visitors, both visitors and online viewers. Now, Coma asks for houses. I'm not asking houses. This is like a small structures. You can go back and look at James Wine's work and Architects for Making Public Art for materials and forms. I included the links for them. But I don't want you to be kind of all locked up about this, all right? Be spirited, spontaneous, free, all right? Don't lock yourself into a hunt for perfection or a game of getting this game right. There really isn't any game to get right, right? Perhaps even a strange or silly thought might work, or something that seems like a joke when you first say it. But then when you look at it, it can be a little bit less than a joke, but still, it might still be silly. The images with the text are not for your portfolio. This is so we can have a dialogue in class, right? So just be relaxed. I think the best idea is if you have time while you're coming and going to the university, or falling asleep at night or something like that, just to kind of come up with an idea and then go with it. All right. So don't turn yourself in, because this kind of project can be like a desperate, like, what the heck is going on here? Don't make it like that for yourself. All right. All right, so that's the idea. In order to explore that idea more, I would like to go through two architectural groups, one from the 1960s, Archigram, and the other one from the 1980s, which I mentioned before, which is the paper architects. And the lead architects in that motion, at least they gained the most notoriety, were Alexander Brodsky and Ilya Yudkin in Russia. I think that Yudkin still lives in Russia, and I think that Brodsky lives either in Europe or the U.S. or wherever he wants to. So let's talk about these things in terms of a response. And first, I'm going to start with in terms of responding to the world and what it is. And so this is the most famous image by Archigram. Are you guys familiar with this image? Okay, so when they did these drawings in like 67, 68, it like just exploded through the world, because no one had ever done this kind of almost like ridiculous drawings, right? About could there be a city in these cities, especially this image of the walking city with these giant bugs that walk around everywhere and take the city with them. That created in their thinking, and then the publicity and the notoriety that came with it allowed many other architects to also go in a variety of directions to deal with the way they thought that the world should be free, right? And I think that was like James Wine's. He's of that generation, although he didn't do any work like this. Liberation. How do you liberate not only yourself and your thinking, but how do you liberate the city? How do you liberate our world, right? How do you liberate us to make ourselves into a particular way, and especially that it's okay to imagine a world that is a little bit ridiculous in order for all of us to recontemplate the world in a completely fashion. In other words, architects don't have the luxury like artists or musicians or poets or anyone else to do things ridiculous in actually the construction of things, because the cost of everything about it is too crazy and it may not even be buildable. So it's actually very few architects that have the same freedom that the other art forms have to fantasize a way which critiques how they live and how we live today or how we might live tomorrow. And so Archigram is really the kind of first of this kind of critique, the provocation. Not like Frank Lloyd Wright making his broadacre cities. It's not like Le Corbusier with the City of Towers. It's not like the garden cities from the late 19th century in England. These were real proposals about how to respond better with the city, which were in fact revolutionary and did influence our world. But these architects, they weren't that way. They did not intend for this to exist, although probably in their joyous days, drinking or taking drugs, they probably did think it was a good idea, right? So why? What does a walking city say to you? Any of you guys have any thoughts about that? What does it mean? Sure, yeah. I mean, kind of like a cruise line transportation, right? You're making it very pragmatic. So this is a giant bug, right? Walking down the street, or walking. Well, it couldn't even fit in a street, right? Isn't there some movie, one of those, disaster movies where a cruise ship gets stuck in New York City somewhere in the middle of, Manhattan or something, stuck, can't move. So, isn't there a myth of a city in a turtle pack? Is there? I don't know that. Yeah. Oh well, that could be. There's an interesting response, because there are lots of interesting creation myths in the world about how things came into being. So maybe it is, but it does also respond. You have to remember this is the '60s. We're now going to the moon, right? We're trying to build all kinds of things that we never imagined possible. So couldn't you build this? Probably could. I mean, in some way, right? To me, it's just an explosion of a lack of imagination about the way people think about architecture. That it has to sit in the ground, that it has to be permanent, that it can't move around, that people can't control how it moves around. They can't take their whole city to another city. I mean, you could just walk to another city with this, right, and have your city there. So everything is locked in a way which doesn't give you the flexibility because of your architecture. And they're trying to give you flexibility in the architecture, which comes out really clearly in the work that comes right after this, right? Which, though, if they had never done the giant bugs, they would have never achieved the notoriety that they did achieve, because I think of that mythic quality, right? I mean, this is before Star Wars. This is before any big, when Stanley Kubrick makes 2001. There's really nothing like that. That's really just like, those guys are just in space on a bigger spaceship. That's all it is. There's no sense that there's a different kinds of world that might happen like this. So there is a joy, and I encourage you to participate in that joy if you like to in your work, to imagine these critiques. I also think it is a I mean, its bug-like quality is a critique also of the 1960s modernism with just steel and glass towers, just with tall housing projects that go up into the sky. They're British, which is especially bad in Britain. So that there's this sense that we've got to keep looking for architecture to be something else. Maybe this isn't the perfect answer, but we need it to be something else. We definitely don't want to keep doing what we've been doing. And if you listen to these guys they're almost like they're almost like comedians in terms of the way they present themselves and the looseness of their ideas. Okay, so where am I going? Okay. So this was kind of his second idea. This was, so Peter Cook and Ron Heron, there were like 4 or 5, but Cook and Heron kind of lasted, I guess, over a longer period of time. And so Instant City was basically an idea that cities could pop up. So rather than the pop-up store of today, it's a pop-up city. So a whole city could pop up, and one of the main attributes of his design for pop-up cities, because there were other architects in the world, Italians, French, doing this kind of pop-up city ideas, right? But his was their idea was based on this idea that in order to have a pop-up city, for some reason, you need to have a roof, right? So this roof would kind of float around. So it becomes like another symbol, like the big bug. So you have the roof floating around, right? And kind of establishing where the city will arrive or where the city is now existing, right? So again, providing that kind of flexibility for anything to happen, and also allowing anything to happen under the roof. So there's no rules about what goes on, what kind of architecture, what kind of things happen under the roof. Although the pop-up cities are really about communal functions. They're not really about housing functions. So they tend to be always about things that people would come to do together as a transferred pop-up city. And then he had this long thing related to Instant City, which is what I was just showing you and calling pop-up cities. I'm sorry, it is Instant City, but the dirigible and the balloon played a heavy part in this idea. So here's another pop-up city event. In which you can see that he's also very much involved in, you might say, pop art, because this was you can see the culture, the life of the stars and the models, the comedians of his own culture occur as kind of billboards, as the kind of art form of the day, which was true at that time in the late 60s. And then the pop-up, this Instant City, can kind of help make things happen in old cities. So yeah, you can't make them happen, all the time on the street, but maybe you could make them all happen from the air. To make that city, to make that more flexibility, but to make for the joy of things that might happen under that flexibility. And here they are, Instant City is carrying it around. So then see if I can find it here. Then Cook started focusing on this idea of the idea of the pop-up city. And this is, of course, there were actually buildings done like this, like the building in Japan, where they actually have popped in on a core. But the idea to create a flexible system, so you just create the infrastructure, and then things get popped and people use it as they want to take place. Or it could be like this kind of structure, which is a giant grid form, which then slabs kind of both cantilever and sit within. Or more like James Wines' house of high-rise of homes, which had the suburban homes, except here they are focused on, rather than the parity that Wines is getting at here, maybe it's actually real. You know, why can't you drive your Freedom mobile home and keep your life free and stay there? Again, the infrastructure is created, and then the ability to create your own world and your own possibilities. So if you think about this in relationship to Coma's work, it has to do with, you know, they want this freedom, they want this ultimate creativity. They don't want to be told what to do. They want them to be able to either walk to you, or they want to be able to fly in over the whole infrastructure, right, and create these festivals and events with people's spirits. So they've imagined this other world and maybe even other people, because you have to change the governmental structure for this kind of thing to happen, just for it to fly over, just for it to land in the city. Any thoughts about Archigram? Okay, where are we here? Okay.
I've got also been tried in real life, like floating canopies at a large scale like that.
On the dirigible, or on a helium balloon? I don't think so. No. But you know, they should bring it back now, because you can go to Turkey and there's like 1,000 balloons rising up on one day. You know, those beautiful pictures, right? So now maybe all those balloons could come together and do that. And then Janet Eshelman, she does the giant floating nets. I think I tried to send it to you all, so because it's in St. Petersburg, you can see one of her giant nets. So she makes these public art projects in which these nets are like the size of a football field, floating over you at about 40 feet in the air, and they're fantastic to lay on the grass on an evening and watch these things change color and connect. But it's not. But see, it's like a more of a formal thing. It's not what the kind of social animal that the Archigram wanted to create. Brodsky and Yudkin, when they started, so Brodsky and Yudkin are two architects in the Soviet Union in the 80s, prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union in '89. There was really no outlet for any creative architect to work independently. So all work was established by the state and what architects did. And to build a private house or to do anything that was outside the norm was virtually impossible, unless you made it to the highest echelons of a few architects that got to do things in the USSR. They had eliminated the church. So one of the more creative activities in the USSR was wedding chapels, which people built, which they designed, the state did, for places to have their weddings, but they were separated from the church. So there were a few options. And so a group of architects in the Soviet Union in the late 70s, they started just doing drawings among each other, sharing their drawings. And then Japan Architect opened a competition which encouraged drawings of all natures in response to their prompts. And the paper architects began to dominate the winning of those competitions. which I think Japan Architect gave out like $1,000 cash if you won, and like your honorable mention would get $100 cash, which turned out to be a huge amount of money in the Soviet Union in terms of their ability to do things with their lives, including the ability if you won $1,000, you could actually ask, okay, now I have dollars, can I go to Europe on a trip? I mean, that kind of thing, just take the train across the border. So there was, there was significant lifestyle. I don't think, not in terms of like, having a car and all that, but just in terms of a little bit more empowerment. Brodsky and Yudkin are again in a kind of, I would say that the Archigram wanted to kind of wake up the architectural establishment, you might say, like, get them to rethink, get all young architects to rethink about the way the world was and how it was being built, and could it establish the freedom and joy in life and flexibility in the cities in which all people could participate in that design. Brodsky and Yudkin live more in the Dostoevsky world. Their world is a world in which everything is complicated, in which there are both lonely and miserable people in the world, and there are joyous reunions. There are times when you want to destroy the world. You want to see the absurdity of the world. And much of their work deals with this kind of absurdity, so that you can reflect on the actual world. So they highlight that absurdity in much the way of like a cartoonist might do it. So on the individual level, this is a project for, you may not know this, but in the Bering Sea, there are two islands called the Diomede Islands, which are only separated by less than a mile. And in between the two islands runs the American-Russian border. And one island is in Russia and one island is in the United States. This has been a pain in the ass for the Inuit people who live up there, because they were always one group, right? But the Americans let the Inuits stay on one island, but the Russians or the Soviets completely evacuated the other island, but made it uncomfortable for American Inuits to go across and be on that other island. And so there was a competition, and also between these two islands, which enhances the ridiculousness of the international date line. So they're always on two different days of the year, okay? Because this is where the date starts. So even though it looks like the sun is in the sky, now you guys are on two different days. Because the clock that relates to the globe has to work itself out like that. There has to be a break, a place. And all other places in the world, it's down the middle of the Pacific, and really nothing is that dramatic except for this location. There's a competition to link these two islands in 1988, when there was a lot of dialogue going on about what was happening with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union does fall apart, and there was a lot of going back and forth, a lot of citizen-to-citizen activity between American citizens and Soviet citizens. In this, a lot of the projects that came in were like literal giant bridges and that kind of thing, right? Well, so you can see here, Brodsky and Yudkin, yes, they did make a bridge to go across, but the bridge is a lonely trek across that bridge. They don't imagine it as a celebratory highway. I mean, literally, there were some that were like, get the highway going kind of thing, and go all the way across the Bering Sea and go to the mainlands also. And I don't have many more. I don't have any more of this. It's just their work. But you can see the absurdity of building a huge bridge under the ground, which is also about the absurdity of the whole location. So they're expressing that absurdity, but that architecture can express it, and the way that a human engages that architecture becomes the crucial attribute. So you're not just thinking about this bridge underwater, which actually I think would be really beautiful if there was such a thing in the world. But you're thinking about this person, right? This person in relationship to the bridge. And they could have drawn a sunny day, right? But they drove a windy, dark, cold day to reinforce what I think we traditionally think as the loneliness of being in that moment of thinking and of transition, but to physically engage the space through this absurd below ground bridge. And you can see there's I don't know, you may have seen this project. Not quite sure who did it, but it's on a small canal, and you come down the one side of the hill, but then you go down. They built a trough across the canal so that as you're walking on dry land, actually the water is up here at your head level. So, if we don't have any drawings here, any drawing tools. Does that make sense? So here's the level of the water, right? And instead of making a bridge like this going across the water, right, they built a trough that goes down like this, so you stay dry. But as you walk in the trough, your head is right at the level of the water. Not quite. For a child, it would be at the head of it. I think for an adult, probably more designed to be a little bit above your waist in terms of that experience, right? And you think about the differences between those two, which is always important. That's also why I'm presenting Archigram and Brodsky and Yudkin, who may probably see no relationship to each other, is to always make that contrast. But so one is about a difficult human experience. The other one is about a fun, cool thing to tell your friends, really. A different way to go across a bridge that, go across a body of water that you never thought about. It's still creative. It's probably fascinating to be able to stand there and walk, look on the water like that on an edge. But it has not the same emotional and emotionally complex point of view that Brodsky and Yudkin are trying to bring to architecture. And I'm just going to go through some of them. So here we have the bridge, which across a very dangerous gap. And the bridge, though, is not a bridge. The bridge is a crystalline gazebo, which is very tenuously attached to both sides. So is it a bird cage for a bridge, or is it a bird cage for death? Is this just, like a moment in time before disaster strikes? Is it the fragility of disaster? And I think that's more what it is. I think there's like a fragility of the idea of our ability to hold things together, and we're just barely holding them together as they create the architecture in this precarious situation. No, this has nothing to do with it. Now these are just other projects. Sorry. Yeah, no, these are just other projects. This one I don't understand very well. I showed it for Habitat for Humanity. So this is the kind of crystalline dome, the famous dome for every significant building in the world that was built under neoclassicism emerges, but here it has appeared as an empty dome floor over what would be considered the nightmare of a modern city, which I don't know when they did this, but Moscow has its own giant buildings that march across on the main avenue, but they're very far apart, like Le Corbusier thought about them. But when I see this now, I think about Hong Kong and modern China, and I think about the way that things are built, or Rio, right? The way things are built and crash together. and then this neoclassical form among the kind of teeming city on top of it. What does it do to you? When you guys are my audience, you have to add some flavor here to my podcast, which I'm now developing right now, here as we start, okay? Does it mean anything to you that now the capital of the United States is now, or Argentina, or I don't know how many other places is lodged there in the midst of the chaos of the city, the drudgery of the city? That a building is now a kind of, rather than you have the looking up, which was always about the dome to look up, but the reality is below you, right? The reality of the high density city with a kind of total inhumanity, both the absurdity of this number of cars and the size and the width of the city and the scale of these buildings. A cage? It could be. Okay, so that's good. That's good. Just keep. What other thoughts do you have? Does look like a prison? Yeah. What would it be like to be in a prison in which you look down on the cars going by all the time? What would that experience be like? To be there trapped all the time? And is this a prison just here, or is this part of the prison over here also? I'm sorry, I'm pointing to the wrong thing. So is this also part of the prison in effect? Is that, is that part of what they're saying?
Yeah, the part on the left is like like two large walls.
Right.
But then like on the right is like an open space, but it still feels like a city.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, in city, you can see I did the drawing for you here. I love these like little practical drawings, like, it's like a cartoon, but yes, we're architects. We can show you how to do it, right? So it's over an intersection, which you can't really feel there, right? So, yeah. But I think, so I think that it continues this theme about how can you imagine a world that would express, or how can you imagine an architecture that would express how you feel about something, how you're connecting. Oops, we're almost, oh God, I've been going too long. So anyway, so these are some of the more of them. This is a Crystal Cathedral, the famous building in England, except now it's just a pair of sheets of glass standing up, which fragility might bring them down. This is like the history of the world on poles, except you can't read it because it's impossible to know what it is all through history. This is a city made as a hill arch. This is what they call the intelligence market, which I think is like Borges' infinity of knowledge and the impossibility of gaining that knowledge, which is also part of this, the impossibility of gaining the knowledge. Or the island of stability is a place where 3 eggs are stored, 3 giant eggs, not a stable form in anyone's thinking. The villa of claustrophobia, so you are just staring back at yourself. The Nautilus, which is a guy who's like living on an island that's an eyeball in this kind of tower on an island in the middle of the traffic. So you can sense the kind of, you can come on. No. The desperation of this kind of complexity of sadness and presentation of kind of hopefulness too, I think, by making these things happen. All right. Thank you, my Zoom audience. Stop here, stop share. Goodbye. And there we go.